Welcome to the Agile Career Podcast, where we will take you on the journey from employed for life to employable for life. We'll give you the tips, insights, and strategies to help you build the transferable skills that you'll need. So let's get started. Please welcome your host, Gunter Richter.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the next episode of the Agile Career Podcast. As most of you will know, this show features guests, and we talk a lot about their careers and especially their career transitions. Some shows, however, we've taken a slightly different angle and we've looked at things almost from the other side of the desk. For example, we've spoken to talent acquisition specialists before. We've had skills development specialists on the show and specialists in higher education. So today's show takes a fairly similar approach or follows a similar vein. And our guest today is going to challenge our thinking and demystify a certain topic that we're going to talk about. What topic, you may ask? Well, you'll have to stay tuned and find out. So my guest today is Fiona Hathorn, who is the CEO of Women on Boards. This is one of many roles that Fiona fulfills, but I'm going to leave it up to her to talk a little bit more about that. Welcome, Fiona. Thanks for being on the show today.
You're welcome. Delighted to be here, and delighted, I hope, to inspire people to think about the boardroom as a career strategy as well as doing something great for society.
Yeah, no, I was really excited when you, I guess, indirectly reached out to me because, and I think we'll get into the conversation as we go, it was not something when thinking about career that was top of mind. And, it's really nice to get some sort of fresh ideas onto the show and some different lines of thinking. So I'm really looking forward to our chat. I mean, do you want to start off with just introducing yourself a little bit more and, share with the listeners what you do at the moment?
Sure. My background's asset management. So I started a career in the city in the late 1980s, buying and selling shares. And I specialised in the Asian markets. And luck plays a part in life sometimes. And the Asian markets were going gangbusters. You had negative real interest rates because many of the countries have their currencies locked to the US dollar. Property booms, you had new markets allowing foreign investment for the first time. So I had an absolute ball. And I remember as a graduate trainee, lots of the graduates, particularly the men actually, wanted to join the US and the UK desk. And I said, well, I'll do the Japanese and the Asian desk. And of course, I landed in the right area. So I had a fantastic time. And that meant that I had exposure to the boardroom from a young age, because I was buying and selling shares, talking to very senior chairs, board directors and chief executives. And when you have exposure to the boardroom, you get a sense that you know what goes on in the boardroom. And I was lucky enough when I was about 28, so very, very young, to ask to be an advisor and sit in every board meeting of the listed Thai Eurofund Investment Trust. And it's not until you get into the boardroom you really, really see what goes on. So I basically had the tin lid opened. And as a consequence of that, I've been involved in pension fund boards. I now sit on a startup board called Hanks, which is a condom company. We can talk about that later if you want to. And in addition to that, I've recently taken a position with the Financial Reporting Council, and that's to be one of their panel advisory board members. So I'm not on the main board. And the Financial Reporting Council basically interprets the Companies Act to say, what level of reporting should you do depending on the size of your organisation. So that's a bit about my career. I launched Women on Boards in the UK in 2012 because I'd had enough of the lack of diversity on listed boards. But I know it's not just about listed boards. There's charity boards, there's sports boards, university boards. And I really want to inspire people to think about the boardroom from a young age. You're never too young. And I often talk to people in schools as well. So I do lots of different things, but that's a little bit of a potted history about my background.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks for that. I think you've raised two interesting topics there, I suppose, or two kind of challenges. And the one, when we think about diversity, it's generally a challenge, certainly in our business, which is very tech focused. You don't find as much diversity as you may in other organizations or other sort of careers or disciplines. But then I guess there's the boardroom aspect as well. And as you say, you were quite young, when you got exposed to organizations at boardroom level. And I guess for many people, they might not see that in their career paths, or they may not aspire to it. And I guess this is, where I said about challenging our thinking a little bit earlier, is that just some people might think this is beyond their talent, beyond their capability. They may never have considered it, or just think, they're not cut out for it. So because I suppose there's an air of mysticism around, what the board does. It's like an abstract thing up there in the cloud, and there's a boardroom where the board sits and meets, but it's behind closed doors, and you may sometimes hear edicts from the board saying the board said this or the board said that. But do you want to talk a little bit more about the boardroom, and demystify that for the listeners?
Of course. I mean, the key point is it's not rocket science. What boards do is not dissimilar to what some senior executives do in their companies. But basically, the boardroom actually only does two things. It does conformance, which is abiding by the law and filing your accounts, following laws like health and safety, following employment laws, the Bribery Act. And a board is there to oversee how a company's run and make sure things are done properly. And I'll go into a little bit more detail. So there's the conformance aspect, overseeing that. The other thing that a board does is performance. It looks at the strategy of a company and challenges the executives to make sure the company's on track, and supports an organization. So I always say to people, it's not rocket science. If you were to join a board, and I'm talking about your local football club board, there's the football association, but there's little football associations right across the company. What does that little committee and organisation do? It might be collecting money from members, but it's also got legal duties, safety for individuals. So decide how you think you best add value to the board. Are you more a conformance person, or you're a more performance strategy stargazing person? And that's it. The thing that you need to know is understand your duties and responsibilities and liabilities if you join the board. And the great thing is, depending on what type of organisation, so whether you're a company, a charity, you might be a university. There's usually a memorandum, articles of association, which sort of sets up the company structure. And in the UK, we're really lucky. We have something called the Companies Act. And a lot of people think, well, I'm not an expert in the Companies Act. I don't really know what it does. But actually, again, everything's written down in a book. With regard to the Companies Act, there's 7 things that you have to do, 4 things that you must do, and 3 things you mustn't do. And I can go into the detail of all of those. But things like you must act in powers. If somebody's giving you money for guide dogs, make sure you spend that money on guide dogs. Otherwise, you're acting outside your powers. Independent judgment, those sorts of things. So it's all written down. It's not rocket science. And most decent, honourable, honest people can do the right thing, and they can support and strengthen organisations.
I think you've summed it up really nicely. And I like that, conformance and performance, decide where your skills are, or where you're good at. And I think that'll help people relate to the sorts of skills they might need to take on a role like this. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the show. But you mentioned an important thing around duties and responsibilities. And I suppose typically with career experience comes the ability generally to take on more responsibility and accountability and that sort of thing. What would you say to people who might be considering a role such as, becoming a board member, in terms of their responsibility and commitment to it, and any kind of concerns they might have about that?
Well, a lot of people, we run a workshop every month in the UK called Get On Board. And it's a workshop that's all about how do you sell yourself in the boardroom. But we cover the things that you've just mentioned, because we should not be encouraging people to join a board if they don't understand their personal liabilities. Because most boards, you don't get paid charity boards, you don't get paid. Even our big listed FTSE boards or big global boards, you get paid something, but you get paid nowhere near as much as executives. And if anything goes wrong, I don't know whether you recall Kids Company, you could be in front of a parliamentary commission. You could be struck off in terms of ever being a company director again. And if you do something dishonest, you could be fined. So you haven't been paid, but you've got all these reputational issues. Why would you do it? And so I make sure that people understand those liabilities. The reality is most board directors don't get into trouble. Companies go into insolvency and liquidation all of the time. And most people sitting on those boards, either executive employees or board registered directors, either as a director of the company, an employee one, or a non-exec, an independent person, they don't get into trouble because they haven't been dishonest. So, the law is not out to get you and to fine you, but it is very important that you understand your responsibilities. Now, you touched on age. Clearly, the more experience you've had, the more wisdom and experience and things that you've seen, and therefore the more support and advice you're able to offer. So that's one thing. But I talked about the You're Never Too Young. If you look at, for example, universities, they have clubs. They have the rugby club, the debating society club, the ski club, the hockey club. Nearly all of them have what's called a committee. Actually, that's a little board with responsibilities, and you can get into trouble for taking money and not looking after it. So there's so much support out there, but it is important that you understand your responsibilities. And I can sit there and say to people I don't care whether you want to do it or not. I just want you to know it exists and know you could do it if you're interested. And we can talk about time commitment and insurance and all of those other things that we cover in our workshops, because there's so many society boards out there that I want to make sure they're diverse, and there's really good common sense and community people sitting on those boards. And why couldn't it be you? So for me, it's seed planting. And I hope that when people have spoken to me or now spoken to you, you can say to them, have you ever considered the career benefits of being on a board, but also the society benefits of being on the board? So there's loads of reasons to do it. There's lots of reasons not to do it. And what is crucial, that anybody joining a board, because of your responsibilities, does their due diligence. Who's on that board? Do I like them? Can I work with them? Because I'm collectively responsible for what happens in this organization. And am I comfortable with that? And if you care about what that organization does, whether it's a university or a housing association or a local hospice, you will find the time. And every board has different time commitments, and every board is of a different size. And the minute you plant these seeds, I hope that everybody listening to this will go out and say, oh, I wonder what the board structure is of that theatre. I wonder about that. And what about the hospital? Who's on that board? What about the police authority? What do they do? Oh, do I know anybody on that board? Really? Oh, I'll go and ask them. And what you tend to find historically board positions have not been transparently advertised. And that's one thing that we do. So it tends to be you tap your mate on the shoulder and says, oh, Jamie, do you fancy joining our board? Oh, it's not difficult. It does this, that, and the other. Now, I'm being stereotypical here, but sport, I tell you what, plays a big part in the liquid network of information. So what I'm trying to do is to create a different way to network and different way to get that information out there.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. And I like the bit you said about, whether you choose to do this or you choose not to do this as a career option, at least it's out there. And I think this is a great exercise in building that awareness, because I guess yes, personally I've always known about boards and what they do, but aside from community-based things, I've never really considered it as an option. And I'm sure many listeners are in the same boat and may not have even been aware of it as being an option. You mentioned, I want to go back to the conformance and performance bit, the way you explained that. And are they mutually exclusive? So if you're focused on performance, do you perhaps have a conflict of interests with conformance?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because let's start talking about the environment. Performance versus conformance, short-term versus long-term, based on the decisions we're making. But just to go back a little bit, if you sit on a board, these are the 7 general duties. Duty to act within powers. So some organizations, a company that's listed, generally can do almost anything in their articles of association. If you're a charity, you can't. If you're a university, you probably can't. If you're a hospital, you can't. So the minute for example, a charity might say, oh, let's set up a shop and raise money, sell things. That's trading. So you actually have to have a separate trading arm. And if you don't set that up, you're acting out ultra vires, out of powers. Duty to promote the success of the company. That sounds a bizarre thing for the Companies Act to have to explain to somebody. Well, of course. But in reality, what does that statement mean? It means you have a duty to look after the long-term survivability of that company for the benefit of its stakeholders. And its stakeholders could be shareholders. It might only have one shareholder, and that might be one of the owners of the business. Employees, customers, society, HMRC, the taxman. There's loads of things in terms of that statement. And of course, that is also about environment. That's about how much investment do you put in now, where you might not get the returns short term. And if you're taking any decisions on environmental things at the moment, that might be punitive in terms of the profits of the company, but it might be very important for the long-term survivability of the company. So take Lego, for example. It's plastic. What are they going to do to think about their environmental footprint? And there could be an effect on profits now. And I could talk about Nespresso coffee, for example, the little coffee capsules. Yeah. There's so many decisions to long-term versus short-term. You've also got a duty to exercise independent judgment. So if you're around that table and you see something that you don't think is quite right, it's your duty to say so, even if it upsets the person sitting next to you, because you're all there to be independent, because you've all got a duty to the company, not to the chief executive, not to the owner of the business. It's different. And then the other things that you must do, and then there's things that you mustn't do out of those 7, but the 4th thing that you must do is exercise reasonable skill and care and diligence. And that basically is quite simple. And again, you wouldn't think you'd have to write it down. It means, could you just actually turn up to the meeting? It's your duty to attend really every meeting. Would you do us a favor and open the board pack and turn your brain on before you come to the meeting, rather than saying, oh, well, I think this and I haven't done any work. Everybody's got a duty to take reasonable care, skill and diligence. And as long as you do that, even if the organisation gets in difficulty, you'll be okay. It's like a get out of jail card free. Then the other duties are related to conflicts of interest and not accepting benefits from third party. And again, none of this is rocket science. I can talk to you about what really happens in the boardroom, because there's the reality, but there's so much help out there for you. So it's not difficult. Bringing moral compass to issues and common sense, and anybody can say, sorry, I don't actually understand why we do that. Could you explain to me that product launch again? Right. Okay. So you can't really explain it to me. Well, if you can't explain it to me in layman's terms, maybe we shouldn't be doing it. So it's that sort of challenge that protects and strengthens a company. And, one of the things about being in the boardroom, there's nothing gender specific about the boardroom. And we know diversity of thought as executives and non-executives means you get better outcomes. But that's only if you can manage a diverse team and those board meetings are chaired well. Because there's no point having a diverse voice there who's not allowed to speak or gets knocked down. So it's an interesting environment and really enriching.
Yeah, and I like what you say there, because not at the board level, but certainly at a project and a project delivery level, we've done a lot of work and research around performance of diverse teams versus more homogenous teams. And there's all the classic things like groupthink, and, we've all got the same experience, and we've all got the same cultural background, and we all support the same team, and blah, 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 and all of that sort of thing. And, as soon as you begin to introduce more diversity, and, a lot of people, it's, for certain people, it's a very controversial topic, but from all the research we've done and the way we've observed our projects is it is beneficial to the outcome of whatever you're doing, because you bring new ideas on board. You challenge some of your, embedded thoughts, you challenge some of your beliefs and all these sorts of things. You approach things in terms of trying to solve problems in different ways. So, certainly at the project and operational level, if that holds true, there's absolutely, as you say, no reason why it wouldn't be as beneficial at the board level.
And it's about a good chair. Because one of the things, if you join a board, and it's a bit like analysing whether you can work within the company and with the team, is does the chair have a good relationship with chief executive? Because remember, the chair sets the agenda. The chair should be controlling who speaks in the meeting and deciding how much time is given to different subjects. So is the chair a my way or the highway person? And is the chair consciously inclusive? And that's what's key in organizations as well, because you have to work really hard to consciously drag people into the conversation and say, oh, hold on a second. David, I think you said something a bit different there. Why is it we've all read the same information, got the same data, but we've come to a different conclusion? And those are all those skills that you've just described that are so important, and they're as important in the boardroom.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the questions I'm going to ask later on is around transferable skills. And I think, you've just picked on one there, and it's around facilitation, for example. So it's something very much that we focus on as consultants when we're facilitating workshops. And you may be working with a customer or a number of stakeholders. One has a really dominant personality. They'll talk over the other ones. Someone won't get an edge in word ways. And as a facilitator, you need to balance the conversation and, make sure that people get a bit of airtime to voice their opinion or their requirements or whatever it is. So again, I think people will ask, well, what skills might I have that I can apply at a board level? And I think you've highlighted one there.
I mean, one of the things that loads of people do training in organizations, how many people have been on understanding and influence workshop? Because how you influence people is different depending on who they are, depending on who you are and who they are. And understanding all of those stakeholders and how you influence is through the company, but it's a fascinating subject. But yes, transferable skills. When you join a board, you need to explain, and that's where Women on Boards UK comes in. And we work with a lot of corporates helping retiring partners, but also getting people to think about community boards as part of a career development strategy. And I know we're going to cover that in some 7 reasons I've got. But transferable skills, if you want to join a board of, I don't know, your local NHS, they want to understand how you're going to add value in the boardroom by sending them an executive CV and telling them all about what you do in the day job. Maybe you're head of people for, I don't know, Unilever. They'll just sit there and think, well, great, but we're not hiring a head of person. We're hiring somebody in terms of performance conformance. And if the only thing you can talk about in our board meeting is HR strategies, well, actually, we've got one of those. We've taken that as read. We know that you're an HR expert, but what else could you contribute in the boardroom? And that's really understanding your transferable skills. And my favorite transferable skills story is a lady called Angela Staines, who is the chief exec of Australian Airlines. And she's now a portfolio non-executive director. So she's left full-time executive life and has got portfolio positions. And like anybody, she was nervous about becoming a non-exec. Now, you and I would think that's laughable, chief executive of Australian Airlines, what she's got to be nervous about. But actually, she was moving into a different zone to not run the company, but to oversee a company. And she was embargoed from going on to anything that was airline related for so many years. And because the headhunters were going to make quite a lot of money placing her on various boards, she shared her nervousness. And this headhunter says, Angela, let's just think about this. What's your transferable skill? Right. Airline, seat, hospital, bed. Okay, so that's the transferable skill, knowledge. Health and safety, airline, hospitals, airline, railways. Okay, so airlines, what else have we got? We've got unions, highly unionized industries. Okay, how many have you got? What about capital intensive structures and complex leaseholding arrangements? Those are all the industries that you should be looking in. And that's your transferable knowledge across the board. And it might seem obvious, but to her, she was as nervous as anybody else. And so that's why we do a lot of hand holding, but understanding that transferable knowledge. And we always say to people, when you go in for your interview, and we give free interview support as part of our membership, we remind people that the way they are being interviewed is going to give people an insight in terms of their behavior in the boardroom. So if they're not succinct, and they are not focused in their interview, in their answers to the question, the person on the other side of the table will think, oh my God, they're going to be a nightmare. They're just going to go on and on and on. And we've got this huge agenda. So it really is and very important that at that level, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. If you do that, you're making it clear that you understand you're an equal around that table, as opposed to an executive interview, which is different. Because at this level, assuming you get to the interview stage, it's now a personality contest. It's about fit, and it's about your fit with their fit, which, of course, as we know, whether you're a female or male, if you're not known to the existing candidates, you're going to have to interview better, and you're going to have to understand your personality style and somehow communicate it so they're not scared of you. Because if they can't cross-reference you with their mates and friends, and that's why a lot of people still get their board positions from somebody they know. And it's why, unfortunately, a lot of board positions are still not transparently advertised, because we want diversity, but we really don't want to interview people we don't know. So, therein lies the overall problem, which is why we exist and transparently advertise as many board positions as we can for free. Why wouldn't we?
Yeah, it's absolutely a symptom of, if you're extending opportunities to your network, generally, who are your network? They're people that are similar to you, and I guess therein lies the challenge. You touched on soft skills as well, and I guess we can cover that when we talk about transferable skills, because often people think about what are these functional skills? What's my industry experience? And you laid out a great example there in terms of Angela Staines around saying how can we look for the parallels between the airline industry and others. And I think that's a great takeaway for anyone who wants to try and get a handle on their transferable skills. So you talked a lot, you talked about the 7 responsibilities, I guess, as that you had to dispense as a board member. And we've touched a bit on diversity, but I guess many people would be asking, why does the boardroom matter? Why should it be something I should think about? Why is it important?
Well, the boardroom matters because it sets the culture and the tone of that organisation. The boardroom ratifies investments. The boardroom sets the strategy. The chief exec will present the strategy and the board will agree the strategy. So it is really, really, really important. And if you think about company boards, that's one thing. But in terms of what's the oversight for the police authority, for example, what's the oversight for our local school, our local academy trust? Who is going to call the headmaster or the headmistress to account if something's going wrong? Somebody's got to do it. So it is crucially important to our society. And that's one of the reasons why the other thing, if you in a boardroom, which I didn't mention earlier, which is crucial, you've got to sign off the accounts. Now, the last thing any board needs, and this is one of my other favourite quotes, British Cycling gets public money to help grassroots cycles, and we've got Olympic lottery money coming into it as well. The last thing that the British Cycling Board needs is a load of cyclists. It's quite useful to have a few, but the last thing any other board needs is a load of accountants, because British Cycling is involved in events management. And actually, I maybe should not go too much detail here. There's been a few cultural issues within the cycling industry, drug-related possibilities poor record keeping of drugs being given out, as well as lots of things. So, and that's across lots of industries. So it's not just that organisation. So it is really, really important. But you must be able to read a P&L and balance sheet, but you don't need to be an expert. So bizarrely, a lot of people don't want to join a board because they're frightened of those liabilities and responsibilities. So we with PwC do an evening, and in fact it's in a podcast where we read the Burberry accounts for a laugh. I mean, like, how difficult can it be? Like, and it's not much different for your home finance. There's income coming in, there's inventory. What's the valuation of that? You've got an auditor, you can ask questions. There's the cash flow that you can look at. And there's a non-accountant, you can say in the meeting, this is all very interesting. I'm fascinated as to why the chief exec is giving me a rosy view, when as far as I can see, our cash flow's halved, our inventories are doubled, and I may not be a financial expert, but could somebody just talk me through that? And maybe you'd like to ask the auditor their view on valuing goodwill, or those sorts of things. So you sort of learn on the job, and getting a boardroom buddy quickly on the finances and saying to the finance director or the expert in the room, can you take me through those things? You will learn it over time, but don't let these things put you off. And there's courses you can go on, but it's not difficult. So, my background was financial, so it was easy for me. It wasn't something I was worried about. But the last thing you need is a load of financial wizards on boards. We could talk about the financial crisis with lots of financial wizards on boards if you want. But yeah.
Yes, say Enron no more. So you make a very good point there. And I absolutely agree about learning on the job. It's and using the finances, or being able to read a P&L as just having a basic skill like that, rather than having the skill of a financial manager. I mentioned when we spoke before that I joined a round table at a very young age. I was 23 when I joined, and I wanted to just join and kind of find my feet and see what it was all about. But I kind of quickly got coerced into the role of treasurer, and I was comfortable running a set of accounts. It was something I studied. It was something I did for work, but I'd never run a charities accounts before. And there were some significant learning gaps there, or knowledge gaps. But having a basic background, gave me the basis for that. And I learned so much. I learned how to run, a set of public money and then the non-public money.
And the thing about the charities, one of the things that we do in this Get On Board workshop is we've got lots of slides, and what we do is make it simple. I can't pick up a book because I've got the book that I want to show you under this PC, so I'll be moving it around. Well, it won't actually matter. In fact, this is a recording, so nobody can see the book. But the Charities Commission has idiots' guides, to setting up a risk register. Choosing an auditor, the right questions to ask, and trying to make it in layman's terms, because I don't know how many charities there are out there in the UK, but it's at least 300,000 to 400,000 charities in the UK. Some of them tiny little things that do real good in the community, and some huge charities. So there's an awful lot of support out you, but yeah, there's lots of support to demystify. And the key thing, if you sit on a board, is to say, okay, I know the Companies Act, because lots of charities are registered with Companies House as well. So you've got almost 2 regulators. Okay, I've got that. But who's your regulator? So if you're sitting on a pension funds board, there's a pensions regulator. If you sit on a financial services board, there's a Financial Reporting Council and Financial Conduct Authority. And they interpret the law based on the type of company that you are. And they're really exciting. And my favourite guidance to what you should do if you're sitting on the board is something called the Weights Review. And Weights, if you know, is one of the largest private companies. So it's not listed, it's a construction company, still family owned. And the government decided after Carillion, there was almost systemic risk in our society, and Carillion was listed. But of these big companies that's not listed, and we've got contracts, roads, railways, hospitals, what's the systemic risk and who's overseeing their reporting? So there's a weights review on the type of reporting that's required for large private companies. And the nice thing about that, again, the little weights review, they've got like a little star diagram, and it's idiot's guide as to what to do. Make sure you have the right executive team. Make sure you understand the company's purpose. There's lots of little things to do. And you can use the little weights review, and the Charity Commission's got one, almost in anger on your board and say, have we got this covered? And it's all written in layman's terms. So there's so much help out there. But of course, if you don't know and you haven't had exposure to the boardroom, you don't know. And I talked to you earlier about my father, who sat on lots of different community boards. And because my mother was working full time, he would drag me along to various different meetings. So I had a sense of what went on in the boardroom. And we have a webinar sort of podcast cloud course as well on audit and finance. And we show you a live board pack, which the charity Fight for Sight have given it. It's redacted in various different places. Because if you haven't touched and felt a board pack or seen it, a minority or somebody who's not been in the boardroom, we need to feel competent before we're confident enough to apply. So my job is to make people confident enough to apply in what they're not yet competent to do, because your round table, wasn't it?
That's right.
You'd have people showing you, helping you. You'd seen the previous minutes. The last person who did it said, "Oh, I'll help you. Don't worry. It's not difficult. You do this." And you probably took it to a higher standard. Normally everybody does as they come in. So that's what we're trying to do, get you to touch and feel it.
And therein lies the demystification, I guess, because, it's taking the abstract concept and it's saying, here are some solid artifacts or some solid processes. There's all of this help out there for you. The hard work's been done. Use that and lean on your transferable skills. You brought up another good one where you spoke about a risk register. And, certainly if you're a project manager or a good project manager, you would know the importance of and how to do a risk register and how to manage risk. So again, I think there's so many of those transferable skills that can be drawn out. We got into talking about Roundtable, and I shamelessly use any platform as an excuse to talk about Roundtable because I think it's such a fantastic organization, as are organizations like Rotary. But I think therein lies the opportunity for many people to get involved at that level. You've said it a number of times about it doesn't need to be a board on the FTSE 100 or any other listed company or even a privately held company. Your children's school, anything, your local football association. There's so many opportunities out there, and I think those are the vehicles, or I suppose the organizations that resonate with people.
I think the thing that's really important is if you are very ambitious, and you don't need to be on a board just because you're ambitious, you're just doing the right thing for your community. But if you look at those individuals at PwC, at JP Morgan, at Mondelez International, at Unilever, who've got to the top of their companies, the research suggests they've normally been on a board of some sort, of some size, of something before the age of 28. They are already networking outside their box. They're already different. Now, there's a whole host of reasons why that might be the case. They might have been a fund manager like I was. They bumped in somebody at the golf club. I don't know what it is. But if you look at, say, Carolyn McCall, head of chief exec of ITV, but also EasyJet, or you look at Alison Rose, and I deal with a lot of women, but it's the same for men as well. Those particular women who are minorities, they've lived abroad. They're already slightly different. They have a different perspective. They also have a strong sense of self. So that's why I encourage it. And I'm hugely inspired by the 30 or so companies that my organization works with that lets us go in and run workshops for their employees. And we have a workshop that's very popular called On Track for Success. Half of the workshop is about influence, meeting management, and championing your achievements. You don't get on if you can't do those three. You don't get on if nobody knows who you are and what you do. So that's the championing your achievements. So we do a little bit of that. And then we say to those individuals, do you know what the board of your company does? Do you know, because one of the things we cover in our workshop is committees, because if you sit on a board, you're normally on a subcommittee as well. So it's important to understand that. We said, do you know that the committees that report into the board, do you know who's on those committees? Because it can be both non-exec and executive. Do you know what they do and why? So in the case of some of our large banks, I'm not going to name anyone, I've just got to be a bit careful here. They might have 33 subsidiary boards in the UK alone. You multiply that down with 3 committees for each of them. That's a huge number of things. And sometimes we're told by large organisations that we've got their top talent team. So I think, oh, excellent. So I'll go in and say, tell us about your board. They don't know. They're too busy in their day job, head down, hoping to get noticed. It's a combination of looking up and understanding and thinking, oh, I'll go and ask them about that committee. Is there an empty chair? Could you present to that committee? Could you get exposed at an earlier age? And Alison Rose at RBS talks about this, the empty chair. And that's for men as well as women. So that's what I mean by planting seeds. And then the organisation, the individual will say, oh, I'm too busy. Do you know anything about my life? I've got no time. And I say to them, maybe now you don't have time. I don't know what's going on in your life, but actually you might be different in 5 years' time. But actually, if you've got time to run a marathon, that's choice. There's a lot of work going into run a marathon. And people imagine board meetings to be every month and all this. It depends on the size of the organisation. It might be 4 times a year. So one of the things that we talk about is the career benefits, to make people think there's a good reason to do it. And so I'm happy to just very quickly take you through those 7 reasons, because not knowing about it means that you are unconsciously taking a decision without being conscious that you've taken a decision. So I think it's important that people realise that if you choose the right board, it's a bit like taking a mini MBA. You're floating at the top of an organisation, getting exposed to all sorts of things you wouldn't do in your day job, and you are learning something. And if you get the right organisation, it makes you a better executive, and you don't have to pay for it. There are liabilities.
As you have to pay for an MBA. So no, absolutely. I think career benefits, yes, people will, the first thing that, what's in it for me? Why should people consider taking on something like this? So you've absolutely preempted my next question in terms of, what those benefits are.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, you normally have to make sure that if you are working full time, that your line manager is aware, because there needs to be no conflict of interest. And it's entirely possible your line manager will say no, as if they own you. And sometimes when you talk about the boardroom, they imagine you're talking footsie boards. You're talking about the local football club or the local arts theatre. So everyone's got to know what's in it for them. So these are the career benefits. The first one is it enables you to give back to the community and do something you're passionate about. So it's possible that you're a bit frustrated in your job, you're a bit bored, but for some reason you don't want to leave. Maybe the pay's good, it's low, close to your school, whatever, and your brain has gone a bit dead. But actually you can reinvigorate your life and give something back to the community. It's something you're passionate about. So that's the first reason that you may want to do it. The second one is it builds your market and industry knowledge and shows to your company that you're ambitious. So you're out there learning something new. So, for example, I joined the charity Fight for Sight, a medical research charity, from the investment perspective, but I learned about branding and marketing. That's a new feather in my bow that I didn't have before. The third one, which I particularly like, is career resilience. It improves it if you take a career break. How many people today now take career breaks, men as well as women, particularly women with a child rearing? I don't care whether you take a career break for 5 years to do whatever, but do realise that you are affecting your pension, you're affecting your options for career, and it is a conscious decision. It's not just, oh, well, it costs a lot for childcare if it's childcare related. Maybe you could go on a community board and give yourself a strong sense of self and learn something at the same time. So it's career resilience. Gives you an opportunity to build your career and leadership skills if you're not in the senior management level and it's going to take a long time to get up. So that's really important. That's that floating at the top that I mentioned at the start. The fifth one is exposure and access to executives within other organisations, senior executives. So it allows you to rub shoulders with senior people outside, and it actually makes you better able to possibly to communicate with senior executives inside your organisation. You can say, oh, well, I saw that issue in the other company I was working for, and that senior, oh, that's interesting. And then one, I think, thing that's a really important one for people to consider, particularly if you're in a large organisation where the recruitment and promotion structure is competitive, is it's a point of difference on your CV. So you've got two senior directors going up for partnership at a big law firm or an accountancy firm. It's very competitive. One's a leader in their community and one isn't. And you can't really differentiate them because they're both blooming marvellous. That could be the very reason why one gets it and the other one doesn't. And so you can get that through, the round table that you were involved. It showed you're different and it showed the extent to which you're in the community. And then finally, and this is a crucial one, it allows you, the individual, to explore the idea of a post-executive career. Because I meet too many executives, male executives as well as female executives, because our brand name's Women on Boards, but we actually help both, particularly through the career side, through our corporate workshops, who are now, men say to me, well, it's not fair. I can't get a board position because they only want a woman or they want an ethnic minority. So it's just not fair. The reality is 67% of positions are still going to white men, but they're having to sell themselves harder. It's now more competitive. There's a structural process for recruitment. It's not as easy. They can't just walk into it. And if they have had exposure to the boardroom at a younger age, they are already better networked. They understand what goes in the boardroom. Therefore, they interview better. They have a better sense of how they'll add value to the boardroom. They communicate. They have a stronger CV. And it allows you to do it. Otherwise, you can get deeply frustrated, deeply fed up, because when you apply for competitive board positions, so I'm talking paid public sector board positions, big universities, lots of interest in applications, you get something that you may never have had in your career, and it's called rejection. And so you actually have to imagine you're an intern putting lots of applications in. And so we support a lot of people, but those people who've done a little bit of non-exec work as part of their career, they find that transition much easier, and they can build a nice little portfolio, little pay, you don't get paid much, but little paid positions, some free positions, and they've balanced their life. So that's the key final one.
Yeah, I mean, those are great. There's nothing that I look at there and think, well, no, that, it's those are all brilliant points. And I think, some of the other bits that resonated as you were talking around that, I think you called it sort of floating at the top, and obviously people can't see my hands floating at the top now, but you get an opportunity, I think, to help, I guess, shape the future of the organization, which, sometimes people feel very disempowered because, there's that definite strategy gap between the strategy and the direction that's set and then the execution. And people do day-to-day stuff and they don't know why they do it. They don't know the importance of it. So I think that's really brilliant, and the way you've summed those up into 7 points is super enough. I'll of course write these up into the show notes so people can refer to them afterwards. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's you've done a great sales job.
Well, I'll send you a link. We've got so many articles on the 7 reasons, but I think the other thing to be aware about is it's noses in, fingers out. So a lot of people on their first few board position get it slightly wrong. They want to do rather than to question and oversee. You're not there to run a company, and that's something that's quite important. You might dive down a drain on a committee, get into a little bit more detail. But if you're doing that all of the time, I often say, imagine a helicopter's over the board. The board is the helicopter. Every now and again, they've got a SWAT team and they come down, but they're really floating at the top. If the helicopter has landed, that means you're in a boarding crisis, because actually the board has taken over. They're undermining the executives, or they've sacked the executives, but something has gone wrong. So understanding that noses in and noses out is important. But yeah, and I think the other thing, which I didn't say, but it's related to the 7 reasons, unless you get outside, and particularly the case with people who work for these big, large corporates, you actually don't know what you know. You've been a career LIFO. You are not involved in health and safety or HR, but you know all these policies. You're not involved in data protection, but you've got all these money laundering and data protection software and courses that you have to take to be an employee. You don't know what you can lend to other organizations that you didn't know that you knew, but you just knew that wasn't part of your day job. And that's the sort of sharing and the enrichment that you can get with sort of adding an extra purpose to your life. And that's what surprises people, which is why when one of the things that we have is a sort of a course which is free in the cloud, but we do other things, but how to write that board CV. It's deeply difficult to analyze your entire career and work out how to put it into the language of board value add, because it's not only competitive at the interview stage, but you've first got to get the interview. And I haven't even gone into headhunters yet, but what we're trying to do is we're just a community of support that will help people. So for any of your listeners, if they want support and help, just register on our website as a free member, womenonboards.net. And you've met me now, sort of vaguely via a podcast. I mean it. There's nothing gender specific about the boardroom, and I apologize for anybody who's offended by our brand name. It is intentional not to offend you, but to be a safe place for women in particular to come who've been a minority, but we do all sorts of Black empowerment stuff, rightly so, and help men retire, because I've had enough of going into companies where men have found that they haven't got access to courses, they haven't got access to this, and they're becoming a bit cross and a bit chippy, and we want to open everything up. So delighted to help everybody, including yourself, if you want support.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. And I'll definitely get those links up on the podcast episode show notes as well, because I was going to ask, people will say, or people will ask, what if I'm not qualified, or I don't think I'm qualified? What do and I think we kind of drawn this out as we've had the conversation around some of those transferable skills and what you can bring from your working experience. So I guess we've given some really good takeaways in terms of how people can take stock, I suppose, of what those skills could be. What would you say, if someone is interested, what's the next step they need to take? If this resonates with them, where do they go next?
Well, I register on womenonboards.net and then consider and see if you can invest a small amount of money into what we call a Get On Board workshop, which is the first thing that we do in that workshop is we make you explain to us your board value add, just to show you how difficult it is. And then you hear other people doing it. Then we'll go through the Companies Act and what you need to do and what does a director really do, and we'll show you how to write a board CV. It's a very affordable course, but the course is actually more about how do you sell yourself onto the board. So that's where you can go. But there's all sorts of help on our website that's free. In terms of having a certificate, most people sitting on our biggest boards, FTSE boards, have not had a certificate. They've learnt on the job. They might have had a lot of wisdom. Now, we might get to the stage where people do have to have a certificate. There are fantastic certificated courses. The Non-Executive Directors Association, we work with a little bit. They've got a certificated course. The Institute of Directors have got one, which, they're 6-month courses, either modular, or the FT's got one, but they cost thousands. They are brilliant because what they do is take the Companies Act and they'll go through mergers and acquisitions, they'll go through all the regulator, but actually you can read all of this stuff in a book. It's always fun. I mean, I've recently been to INSEAD to be with other people, learning, lecturers, guest speakers, presenters, case studies. The reality is that most people have not got those certificates, and most people can't afford it. So I think it's a combination of both, but there's lots of support out there, and particularly going to, whatever organization you think you're joining, go onto the regulator's site and it will explain to you everything you need to do. And there are different levels of boards, but yes, we're very happy to help, but there's lots of organizations that do similar-ish things. The extra thing that we do is we advertise board vacancies for free, and we've got hundreds. I mean, we've advertised 20,000 board vacancies for free. And we've got about 300 on our website, 50 new ones every week. But what's bizarre is people say, oh, great to meet you at the workshop, met you at that event, that's fantastic. And you could say this to me, Fiona, you now know me. So could you recommend one of your board positions and give me a ring? We are mass market, open to everyone, thousands of members, bespoke at the point you need us. I don't go through for all our 30,000 members. I don't look through board position and remember each one and give you a ring. We're not a headhunter. We're not at that level. So there's loads of different things, but there's so much support out there. And I hope what we've achieved today is to demystify things a little bit, which I know is what you wanted to do, and inspire people. And yes, tell your children, tell your cousins, tell your nieces, tell young people about the boardroom. And I've had one school that's had the Get On Board workshop for their sixth form, and we had the best fun ever, because we're planting those seeds for when they get to university and they're already looking at the world in a different way.
I think that's brilliant, and that is analogous to your experiences you spoke about growing up, where your father would take you to these board situations, and you got to observe this, and ultimately this is where you are now. So I think that's a great story in itself, and yes, hopefully the listeners have this has been something new. It's opened up their eyes to the world of opportunities out there. You've shared loads of resources. As I said, I'll write those all up. I guess finally, if you mentioned, womenonboards.net, where else, or where could people, if they want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, how do they best do that?
I mean, send me a LinkedIn. Get in touch with me by LinkedIn. And do remember, because we talk about LinkedIn, particularly if you want a board position, you've got to have a good LinkedIn profile. But I would say, if you're going to link in with anybody and me, just tell me where you've met me, because I probably get about 50 to 100 LinkedIns a week. And everyone who says, "Oh, I heard you on a podcast. I heard you this," or I bumped into you at a networking, I saw you speak at a conference, I automatically accept without looking at them. If I get random people, and I get loads of random people from all over the world, just ignore them, because I simply haven't got the time to research into who's connecting with me. But if somebody's spent the time and connected, and I think that's courtesy on LinkedIn generally, but that's how to build up that strong network, because I'm passing LinkedIn messages. I follow a top lawyer at Pinsent Mason, also DLA Piper. So any governance regulatory things I'll put on my notes. So yeah, send me a LinkedIn. I'm very, very happy to connect, and I hope to inspire more people.
That's super. Thank you. And you've touched on LinkedIn etiquette, and I think that's a whole episode on its own. I absolutely agree with that. So, but Fiona, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experience and your knowledge. This has been really eye-opening for me. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure the listeners have as well. So thank you so much.
Well, we look forward to hearing your next board move as well.
I'll be in touch.
See you then. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. I'd just like to say thank you to Fiona again for sharing her knowledge and insight on the fascinating topic that is the boardroom. As usual, I've written up the show notes, so those are there for you to go and have a look at the highlights. And just before I sign off, I'd like to remind you again about the agilecareer.club website. It is a free website you can sign up to and network with people that are interested in talking about careers. You can get in touch with me there as well. You can post any questions you have about careers, share any of your insights and knowledge. It's a career-focused community. I'd love to see you there. You can have a look at it at agilecareer.club. And hope to see you there. Take care and talk to you next time.